The diagnostic panel on the Artemis blinked a color Naomi Brooks privately called Federal Funding Orange. Not quite crisis red, but definitely a grant proposal problem. Captain Maya Rios braced one hand on the humming bulkhead and watched a cluster of numbers chase each other like nervous schools of fish. The quantum sail, part jump drive, part bad idea, had glitched during a routine survey near the rim. Routine in this line of work meant everything happens at once, but we wear nicer jackets. Report, Maya said. Chief Engineer Diego Alvarez's boots were sticking out from a panel like a vending machine had tried to eat him. Two good newsies and a bad, he said, voice echoing in the conduit. Good, we know why the sail convulsed. Also good, I can probably stop it from convulsing again. Bad, we drifted into a zone where space-time looks like wet origami. Define wet, Doctor, and Lair asked from the science station, her dark hair escaping the bandana in wisps that said she'd lost an argument with static. As in, soluble. As in, somebody folded reality too fast and didn't iron the creases, Diego muttered. Give me 3 minutes and a superstition. Maya looked at the crew and the system's linguist Naomi and Sergeant Quinn Mason, who doubled as security and morale officer by virtue of being a decent baritone at karaoke. If fear were a gas, there was none aboard. They wore the worn-in calm of disaster professionals, the kind who'd rebuilt coastal power grids after typhoons and kept hospitals running on bicycle generators the year the satellites blinked. Naomi, anything interesting on wideband? Meyer asked. Interesting like music or like we should run? Naomi's fingers danced. I'm getting spectral lines that don't map to human traffic. Lots of them, dense. Quinn leaned over her shoulder. Dense like traffic jam or dense like firing squad? Let's not pre-panic, Maya said. Diego, you want safe or fast? He asked. Fast, we can do safe later. He snorted. The Artemis shuddered, lights rolled to a softer hue, and the quantum sail unfolded with a prairie-gentle sigh. For 9 seconds, Maya felt the peculiar lightness of a leap, the stomach's polite request to renegotiate gravity. On the 10th, the stars stuttered. On the 20th, the lights went out. Somewhere, a toolbox decided weightlessness was slander and took it up with the ceiling. Gravity returned like a stern teacher. So did the lights. The starfield outside the forward viewport was wrong in that uncanny way you recognize before you can name it. Constellations rearranged by a careless god. Plot? Meyer asked, too calm. Diego's mouth opened and closed. So, I think we overshot the inner colonies by, don't get mad, 40,000 light years. Quinn whistled low. Ma'am, we didn't just get lost, we eloped. And sensor map bloomed like an opening flower. She zoomed, then zoomed again, and her hand stilled. Company, a lot. The ships at the edge of their vision grew from pinpricks to sculptures of dark glass and silver bone. Hulls flowed rather than ended, fractal filigree glimmering with captured starlight. They took formation with the kind of grace that implies long practice making other people nervous. Naomi's console chirped. We're being hailed on 3 bands I don't recognize, and one I do, which is them guessing. Put them through, Maya said, smoothing her jacket as if neat cuffs could deflect particle cannons. The screen filled with a figure that looked grown rather than born into metal, facets layered over musculature, a crown of interfaces like a halo of knives. When it spoke, Naomi's auto-translate kept pace with only the occasional wince. Unknown vessel, you have trespassed into sovereign space of the Axiom Directorate. Power down, surrender your craft, and submit to inspection. Non-compliance will be answered by erasure. Maya smiled the way a teacher smiles at a student who has brought a flamethrower to show and tell. Good afternoon. Artemis Terran Research Service. We appear to be extraordinarily off course. We'd love directions and maybe a stern talking to. The alien blinked, not lids so much as a ripple of opacity across facets. You decline to submit. Respectfully, we decline to panic, Maya said. We don't intend harm. Our drive hiccuped. We can depart as soon as we recompile a few regrets. A pause, not silence. The silence had texture, like a room holding its breath. The figure's head tilted, as if calibrating against an expectation that had slipped. Captain, Naomi whispered on a private channel. They are expecting fear. It's in the semantic shadow of their syntax. Erasure is a ritual word. Copy, Maya murmured. Aloud, sovereign of the axiom, may I call you Admiral. We can power down weapons we don't carry and proceed to a polite port if you prefer official tea. We have very good tea. Quinn coughed. We have tolerable tea. Diego held up a dented tin. And excellent cinnamon protein bars. On screen, something like amusement flickered and was strangled before it grew. You will accompany the fourth array to adjudication. Resistance will not be necessary. Splendid, Maya said. We'll follow your lead like sensible tourists. The escort formed around them, 47 ships by Anne's count, each the size of a small city, and guided the Artemis toward a structure that might have been a moon carved by a mathematician. Geometry nested within geometry, petals of docking arms unfurling, vents exhaling glittering gas, a lattice of light like frozen lightning. Places everyone, Maya said. Hats on straight, smiles medium. Quinn flexed his hands. Ma'am, on a scale of 1 to I regret my life choices, where are we? On I've been in worse traffic. Maya said, remember the long blackout in Houston? 15 days without grid power, Naomi said. We sang to keep the kids from panicking. Exactly, Maya said. Same skill set, different audience. The Artemis slid into a bay that could have swallowed a carrier. Atmosphere washed over the hull in a controlled gale. Docking locks clamped with satisfied clicks and exhaled in spite of herself. We are about to meet history. History, Diego said, stuffing a rag into his belt. Better be polite. Polite is optional, Maya replied. Curious is mandatory. We're guests unless they insist otherwise. The airlock cycled. The door opened on a corridor that did not hide its purpose, to impress, to cow, to declare that you were inside a machine whose first language was victory. Walls bore trophies, devices, banners, fragments of starship ribs, arranged with curatorial cruelty. Floors reflected like liquid. Overhead, pulsing conduits throbbed like veins. Their escort waited, 4 figures dressed in layered plates that refracted light to edge. The leader's voice translated into something that made English sound freshly cut. Subjects will follow. Visitors, Maya corrected without heat. Unexpected, but visitors. The leader's pause was microscopic, but Naomi noted it and tucked it away like a thread to pull later. They walked. The corridor widened again, and became a hall that could have hosted storms. At its end, an elevation like a mountain held a throne grown from a single seamed crystal. 1,000 guards stood as if carved there. Maya let herself admire it. Awe is not surrender. Sometimes it is simply good manners. The throne's occupant stood. Taller than the first, more facets, more crown, a geometry of authority. When it spoke, the hall's acoustics turned the voice into a physical thing. Behold the axiom. For 10,000 cycles we have curated order. Knees have bent. Wars have ended. You will present your use value or accept disposal. Diego whispered, did he just call us a spreadsheet? SHH. Naomi hissed, failing to suppress a grin. Maya clasped her hands behind her back. Captain Maya Rios, Terran Research Service. We don't bend easily. It makes our knees creak. But we're excellent conversationalists. We also fix things. Give us something broken and we'll hand you back a story about how we repaired it. Another pause long enough to build a bridge across. You are not afraid. Maya considered the question and the questioner. We are out of our depth. Admiral, but fear is a tool, like a wrench. You don't carry the wrench all day. You take it out when a bolt needs turning. The leader sat, one gesture settling 1,000. Very well, Captain Rios, we will test your claim. You will be evaluated for classification. Classification as what? Quinn asked, deadpan. Useful, the voice said, and the hall's lights dimmed to a heartbeat. Useful, Diego murmured, eyes gleaming. Finally, a performance review that's honest. Maya's smile reached her eyes. Lead on, then. We're good at tests. We've been taking them for centuries, the kind you pass by still being here. And if the hall expected trembling, it received instead the quiet confidence of a species that had memorized survival like a prayer and a joke in the same breath, and had not forgotten to pack both. They were quartered in a suite meant to be a velvet cell, space enough to walk, surfaces that flowed to touch, and a view of docked leviathans humming with restrained storms. Cameras hid poorly, like the way a hawk hides in a bare sky, and paced once, twice, then pressed her palm to the window as if she could read the station's pulse. Diego bent over a panel with the compulsion of every engineer who has ever seen a locked door and thought, "Challenge accepted." Naomi sat on the floor, back to the wall, eyes half-lidded in the posture of someone listening to a station-wide orchestra. Quinn examined the provided meal, violet gel in elegant dishes, and selected the most menacing spoon with professional respect. "If this is poison, it's very polite poison," he said, then shrugged and tried it. Notes of nickel and nostalgia, not bad. The door erized with a sigh. 4 Axiom officers entered, accompanied by 2 planeplate figures whose very lack of ornament read as rank. The tallest of the planeplates spoke. "Evaluation begins. You will demonstrate cognition, adaptation, and agency boundaries." "Agency boundaries," Naomi murmured. "They test for how far you'll go without permission." "Relax," Quinn muttered. "Captain doesn't even let me reorganize the galley without a vote." Meyer inclined her head to the planeplate. "And you are?" "Archivist Severance," came the answer, the name like a blade wrapped in silk. "I curate classifications. The strategos will receive my report." They walked again through corridors that declared victory as architecture, and took notes with the reverence of a biologist cataloging the bones of a myth. She measured power flows by the vibration underfoot, mapped pressure gradients by the itch in her ears, counted guards by the rhythm of their blinks. Knowledge to her was a survival craft. You build it like you build a boat you hope won't leak. The first chamber opened like an eye. Holograms rose, equations in bases unfamiliar, geometries that twisted like vines growing through different gravity. "Compute," said a voice from the ceiling, and stepped forward, palms empty. She didn't attack the math, she courted it. "You're encoding your tensor fields in dodecimal and wrapping error corrections around topology," she murmured, more to the room than to the crew. "Beautiful, wasteful, but beautiful." Her fingers moved, sculpting light. She solved, but she also commented, not to show off, but because craftspeople talk to crafts. "You can reduce computational drag if you stop insisting on symmetry here. The universe doesn't reward neatness, it rewards honesty." Archivist Severance watched without breathing. "You criticize the approximation choices of the axiom. I improve what I admire," and said simply, "If you want a hymn, you should have called a choir." The second chamber was a forest of devices on pedestals, an engine throat, a gravitic lens, a box that hummed in the key of crushed stars. Diego's grin could have powered a small town. "May I?" he asked, and at the archivist's nod he circled the lens, humming under his breath as if syncing with an old song. "This is clever," he said, tapping a seam with 2 fingers. "But you're bleeding power at these interfaces. If you taper the field at the aperture, like this, you get 30% back without sacrificing coherence. Also, your maintenance hatches are designed by sadists. Kindly fire them." A door opened, and half a dozen Axiom engineers filed in, their posture bristling with the combination of pride and fear familiar to anyone who's ever shipped production code. Diego treated them the way a good teacher treats bright students, with respect and zero condescension. He asked questions, he listened. He drew quick schematics on the air with his handheld, the lines crisp as if they'd always been there waiting. "Why share?" One engineer blurted, unable to hold it. "We would not." "Because secrets make brittle empires," Diego said, not unkindly. "And because when I get home, I want to brag that we helped someone make a better lens." The third chamber played 1,000 tongues at once, ghosts of languages the axiom had swallowed. Naomi closed her eyes and let phonemes ricochet in her skull. Linguistics is not a trick. It's muscle memory built from years of listening to elders swap proverbs and children invent slang faster than adults can catalog it. She tasted the morphology, rolled the consonant clusters like marbles, found the pressure points where meaning bent. "These 2 branches share an ancestor," she said, tuning her mouth to a clicking rhythm. She answered in that tongue, then in another, addressing the archivist in ritual honorifics it had not offered, but which her analysis suggested would be accepted. It was. The archivist tipped its head, an angle that meant, in the grammar of their bodies, both concession and new curiosity. The fourth chamber held a mat and blades that grew with a thought. Quinn stepped onto the mat like a man settling into a pew. The Axiom champions approached in armor that shifted to counter his weight. He greeted them, bowed when they bowed, etiquette is never wasted, and moved. His style was not cinematic, it was municipal. The efficient, compassionate violence of a paramedic prying a door open. He redirected rather than crushed, de-escalated rather than humiliated. When he disarmed a champion, he returned the blade with both hands. "Your edge is true," he said. "Your stance leans too far back because your training ground is too slick. Roughen it." After, they offered him the ceremonial drink of their order, bitter and hot. Quinn took it, grimaced, and said, "Reminds me of church coffee," which was not an insult to him. He told them the story of his grandmother's kitchen in Detroit, where coffee was a sacrament shared with anyone who knocked, even the neighbor who borrowed salt and never returned it. One champion asked, puzzled, "Why do your stories turn from steel to kitchens?" "Because endurance lives in kitchens," Quinn said softly. "Every war ends in somebody's soup." Through it all, Maya watched like a conductor who enters late because the orchestra already knows the piece. She intervened only once when a junior officer flinched at his critique. Maya told the story of Apollo 13, the American one, not the later cargo freighter, about how improvisation and humble math brought 3 people home. "Our heroes are the ones who keep the lights on during storms," she said. "We make parades for them sometimes, but the real honor is that people sleep through the night." The final chamber was a theater of maps. Holograms layered wars like sedimentary rock, the Axiom's great victories annotated in the cool voice of a narrator who had never bled. Strategos Valrith appeared, not in person, but in a 3-story projection, angles honed to edge. "Demonstrate," Valrith commanded. "Show me your mind." Maya studied supply lines, staging areas, and the choreography of intimidation. "You're brilliant at first contact," she said, "but your doctrine assumes enemies break at the first roar. A hammer is a good tool. It is not the only one. Watch." She sketched a plan that used mercy as a weapon, bypass the fortresses that exist to be admired, speak to the engineers who keep water flowing, protect hospitals first, broadcast grain prices before battle reports. She spoke of logistics as ethics. Who eats? Who drinks? Who decides? She replaced terror with friction and pointed at how empires fell not to swords but to spreadsheets that lied. "You could have won this campaign in half the time," she concluded, "not by killing faster but by making defections safer." Silence gathered, then sharpened. Archivist Severance said very carefully, "You propose that we abandon awe." "I propose that you outgrow it," Maya said. "Awe is a childhood of power, adulthood is consent." The projection's eyes narrowed. "Return them to quarters," Valrith said, voice an edge that cut itself. "I will confer with the Prime." As they walked, Naomi whispered, "We didn't just take tests. We turned their museum into a mirror." "Good," Maya said. "Maybe they'll recognize themselves without the war paint." Back in the suite, and exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath since Earth. Diego flopped into a chair and stared at the ceiling like it had asked him a riddle. Quinn poured more of the bitter drink and made a face full of affection for things that grow on you. Maya looked out at the bay, at the choreographed enormity of a civilization that had chosen the hammer so often it forgot other tools existed. She thought about her father's lessons at the kitchen table, the Federalist Papers next to a worn wrench, civics beside plumbing. "Government," he'd said, tightening a valve, "is just the name we give to the work of not flooding the neighbors when your pipe bursts." She smiled, sudden and small. "We'll be fine," she said. "How do you know?" Naomi asked. "Because we brought soup," Maya said, lifting the violet bowl, and somewhere in the bowels of the station, 1,000 cameras recorded a species that treated being watched like being invited to dinner. The Axiom expected either arrogance or trembling. They did not expect a storytelling evening. But cultures are porous, curiosity leaked. Officers arrived without orders, then with them. Technicians lingered to adjust the vents and never touched a bolt. Champions sat cross-legged on the floor, armor stacked neatly, eyes bright. Archivist Severance hovered at the back like a librarian pretending not to eavesdrop. Maya kept the room small, 4 chairs, floor cushions, lights down to a glow that makes honesty easier. She asked no one to speak who hadn't first eaten. Quinn ladled portions from a pot he'd coaxed out of the station's smart fabricator. It wasn't Earth stew, not exactly, but it was warm and shared, and the smell made the room feel less like a chamber and more like a kitchen. "You asked," Maya began, "how fear works for us. It does. For a while, then it burns out like any fuel used wrong." She told them about the Great Grid Winter. The year storms chained across continents, and the orbital infrastructure winked out in a cascading hiss. "We learned what neighbors were," she said. "We learned that power is not merely what comes through a wire," and described coastal cities building tide farms not as monuments but as chores, criticizing her own governments, dithering with the affection you reserve for family you refuse to give up on. Diego talked about repairing a hospital ventilator with a child's toy and a rubber gasket, while a nurse held a flashlight with shaking hands. Naomi spoke of protest chants translated across languages in a plaza ringed by riot drones, the way solidarity finds a grammar before it finds a plan. An Axiom engineer raised a hand with the stiff courage of someone stepping off a cliff. "You keep saying we learned," she said. "Does your species learn as one?" "No," Maya said, "and that is our blessing and curse. We are federations all the way down, of towns, of factions, of families. The trick is to build systems that reward cooperation stronger than they reward cruelty." Strategos Valrath entered without ceremony, which was its own kind of ceremony. The room shifted like iron filings around a magnet. Valrath stood, arms folded into angles that signaled both impatience and attention. "Prime Executor Arthais will grant you audience," Valrath said. "But understand, awe has maintained peace. Fear is clean, consent is messy, mess breeds dissent, dissent breeds knives." "Knives already exist," Naomi said gently. "The difference is whether you pretend they don't." Valrath's eyes, if eyes was the right word for their instruments of perception, flicked to Quinn's steady, unthreatening bulk. "Your species fights," Valrath said. "Routinely." "Yes," Quinn agreed. "We are sinners with good hymns." He nodded at the Axiom champions. "So are you." Diego leaned forward. "Strategos, how many ships could you build if you diverted 10% of your intimidation budget to infrastructure?" "Intimidation budget," Valrath repeated, tasting the heresy. "You calculate empire like an accountant." "Empire is an account," Maya said. "A ledger of debts unpaid, you name it glory. Your archives smell like incense, but someone keeps the numbers." Archivist Severance let out a small sound that in Axiom culture meant painful agreement. "It is true," they said. "We tally." Valrath considered Meyer as one considers whether one cannot command. "And if we cease?" Valrath asked. "What fills the vacuum where awe stood?" Maya lifted her bowl. "The mundane, roads, water, fair courts. Nobody writes epics about sanitation, but sanitation saves more lives than swords." "Your metaphors are stubborn," Valrath said, but there was a quirk Axiom for a crack in the Strategos' voice. "Very well, you will speak with the Prime Executor. Know this, if you ask for mercy, you will be dismissed. If you ask for power, you will be destroyed. If you ask for trade, you will be tolerated. If you ask for partnership," Valrath paused, the word fitting poorly in the mouth of the Directorate, "you will be watched." "Watching is a start," Maya said. "You can't trust what you don't see." Valrath left as abruptly as he'd arrived. The room exhaled. An Axiom champion lifted her cup. "To sanitation," she said solemnly, and the room laughed, and the laugh did not sound like a weapon. Later, when the officers had drifted away and only the cameras remained honest, Naomi asked, "Do you think they'll change?" "Cultures don't pivot," Maya said. "They accrete like coral or policy." Diego nodded toward the ceiling. "They can't unknow us now, and we can't unknow them," and said, That matters to science and to souls. Quinn stretched, bones creaking like ships in harbor. Tomorrow you get your audience, Captain. Tomorrow they get it, Maya said. We've been speaking to each other all day without saying the thing. What thing? Naomi asked, though she knew. That ore is a child's toy, Maya said. Beautiful, dangerous. Eventually you put it away. She slept with her boots close to hand because maturity doesn't mean you throw away your hammer. It means you add wrenches. The Prime Executor's chamber was not a throne room. It resembled a council pit sliced into a crystal mountain, seats arranged in nested curves so that no one sat higher than anyone else. That, Maya realized, was its own theater, the theater of technocracy where power performs humility while refusing to kneel. It was, she had to admit, a better play than the one with the throne. Arthai's was smaller than Valrith, less adorned than the archivist's, voice tuned for clarity over thunder. Captain Rios, Arthai said, our strategos contends that you are dangerous in a way we have not catalogued. He also contends that you are useful. I favor useful. I favor reciprocal, Aya said, Arthai's steepled fingers that were not fingers. Say your proposal plainly, we tire of parables. Partnership, Maya said, not vassalage. We don't want to rule you, we don't intend to be ruled. You've mastered all, we've mastered after. Work with us on what comes after all. After all, Arthai's repeated, contemplative. Define. Institutions that survive bad leaders, Naomi said before Maya could. Courts that function when the uniforms change. Civics you don't have to believe in to benefit from. Diego lifted a hand. Trade of ideas, not just parts, your gravitic lens with our thermal management, our agricultural microbes with your drought domes. When you feed people, soldiering becomes a career choice instead of a destiny. And spoke, voice steady. Joint science. We don't just want to take copies of your tech home. We want to build things with you and publish papers with your names first sometimes. Quinn's contribution was softer. Exchange of guardians. Your champions learn our disaster doctrine, mass casualty triage, de-escalation, crowd psychology. We learn your search and rescue in vacuum. Knights and firefighters swap helmets. Arthai's listened like a well-tuned instrument. And what do you ask in return? Safe passage, Maya said. Embassies, a right to refuse conscription into your wars, a right to criticize you without disappearing, a right to help your subjects fix their water without being accused of sedition. Valrith stood at the edge of the chamber, not interrupting, which was its own surrender. They think knives are less efficient than pipes, Valrith murmured. It was unclear if that was mockery or revelation. Arthai's pivoted. Our sovereignty rests on deterrence. If fear softens, revolt follows, the empire breaks. Maybe, Maya said. Or maybe it becomes something that doesn't require the word empire to stay honest. Democracies break too, republics fail. We've watched ours wobble and right itself so many times that wobble begins to look like dance. That's the philosophy, build for failure, expect it, make failure survivable. Arthai's tipped their head. Axiom doctrine holds that perfection is a limit approached asymptotically by discipline. Our doctrine, Maya said, holds that perfection is an alibi lazy tyrant's use. We prefer iteration, mistake repair, mistake better. It's engineering and ethics both. A murmur moved like wind through the chamber. Archivist Severance rose from a lower tier. Prime. If I may, the Directorate prospers when our classifications match reality. These humans refuse our bins. They are not prey, not rival, not subject. The archivist's voice softened. They feel like a mirror. Valrith's angle shifted to discomfort. Mirrors reveal rust, which is why you own wrenches, Diego said. Arthai sat very still. We were taught that consent is a weakness because it can be withdrawn, the Prime said at last. It is a risk, Meyer agreed, but in exchange you get loyalty that costs less to maintain. Terror is expensive. It must be fed constantly. Consent buys itself dinner. A laugh like a crack escaped someone on the third tier. Even Valrith made a sound that might one day evolve into humor. Arthais unsteepled their hands. Very well, terms, limited corridors of safe passage, 2 embassies on axiom nodes, a scientific council chartered under joint seal, no political agitation among subject systems. Maya did not flinch. We will not organize your subjects, she said, but we will not lie to them if they ask what a ballot is. Define ballot, Valrath said, tasting the strange sweet. A ritual in which the mighty must ask permission, Naomi said, and several officers shifted as if the floor had tilted. Arthais regarded Maya for a long, precise silence. You and Strategos Valrath will host a demonstration. A controlled district. You will choose a problem. You will fix it without awe. Maya smiled. Water, she said instantly. Find me a world where people walk too far with heavy cans. Archivist Severance whispered coordinates into Arthais's inner band. The Prime nodded. We have many. Of course you do, Quinn murmured. Captain Rios, Arthais said, if you succeed, your corridors widen. If you fail, we classify you as charming noise and you will be escorted to the edge of our maps. Maps have edges until someone makes a new map, and said almost to herself. Do not be poetry, Valrath said, but without teeth. Then be prose, Maya replied. Prose is where laws live. The audience ended not with guards, but with a schedule. That, more than any declaration, told Maya this was real. In the corridor, Valrath matched pace. You risk much for people you do not know. Not people, Maya said. Habits, the habit of not drowning. Valrath's facets reflected 1,000 versions of her. You will fail somewhere, the Strategos said. Your kind, your doctrine. Guaranteed, Maya said. Build your system so we survive our failures. That is the work. Valrath made a small, private sign over their chest, a gesture and would later learn was used before battle and before childbirth. We will watch, the Strategos said. Good, Maya said. Bring a wrench. They returned to the suite to find a packet of protocols and a pot of the bitter drink already steeping. Diego plucked up the protocol file with delight and texted 3 scientists she had met in the engineering chamber. Naomi drafted, without being asked, a glossary for terms the directorate would stumble over. Consent, audit, ombuds, potluck. Quinn took 2 cups to the door. He placed one outside for the camera. For whoever draws the short straw on surveillance, he said. You're invited too. Maya stared out at the station's patient storms, feeling the traction of something better than victory, the promise of work. It stirred in her the same joy she felt at a fresh notebook. A new town hall meeting, a kid's first question at a science fair. Fear would come again, tools where. Empires prefer hammers, citizens prefer water that runs. But here on a station built to frighten, someone had chosen a council chamber over a throne. It was a small hinge. Small hinges, her father had said, swing big doors. She poured a cup of the bitters and lifted it toward the watching lenses. To big doors, she said. The cameras did not drink, but somewhere in the directorate 1,000 minds felt the latch loosen. The demonstration site was a rectangle of thirst. From orbit, Corinth 3 looked like a brushed coin, sand seas braided with pale salt pans, a few river scars curled like dried vines. District 17 lay where a river used to be. The Axiom called it Resource Zone D17. The locals called it the walk because that was the daily unit of measurement, how far you could walk before the sun taught you humility. They were led to an overlook by Strategos Valrath, Archivist Severance, and a delegation of officers whose uniforms were tailored to look as if they had never bent. Below, the district stretched in dun stripes, modular barracks, a water depot fortified like a vault, and long lines of people with translucent jugs that caught the sun and threw it back as glittered anger. On the horizon, a tumble of black pipes ended just short of the settlement like a joke whose punchline had been budget cut. Here is your problem, Valrath said. Fix it, without awe. Maya had to lock her jaw against the impulse to say something cruel about supply chains and priorities. Instead, she breathed the grit and the sincerity of her crew. We'll need a map of everything under our feet, and a ledger of who pays whom. Archivist Severance inclined their head and passed a slate. Ledger was a wound. Water was tribute. Tribute was obedience. Obedience was quiet. The district administrators met them in a prefab office with windows that didn't open. Overseer Hask greeted Maya with the smoothness of a man who had made a career out of surviving other people's demands. We allocate by queue and quota, he said. The queue teaches patience. The quota teaches respect. It also teaches kidney failure, and said dryly, scanning the clinic's records, which were as tidy as funerals. We will not reorganize your politics, Maya said before Hask could summon indignant outrage. We will reorganize pipes. The human plan was both insultingly simple and bureaucratically ambitious. Diego would salvage the orphaned pipe runs and build a gravity-fed loop that pulled from a hill country aquifer the Directorate had designated non-efficient for centralized extraction, and would test and treat for heavy metals, designing a chlorination routine that could be maintained with local reagents. Naomi would create a public ledger of inflow and outflow posted at every spigot, with color bands instead of numerals for those who read with their hands. Quinn would train bucket brigades and maintenance crews, then bow out so they could run without him. Maya would assemble a water council chosen by sortition, names pulled from a district census and a literal hat, so that decisions were owned by people who would live with them. Valrath watched, arms in angles that meant skepticism. You preach consent as if it were pressure, the strategos said. Will it move water uphill? No, Maya said, but it will keep valves from being turned off in the night. The first town hall felt like a storm trapped in a room. Hask's staff stood with arms crossed. The queue-keepers stood with ledgers clutched. The district's elders sat with their hands around their knees and watched history flirt with itself. Naomi set a table with colored ballots, blue for Route A, green for Route B, red for a suggestion to split the line and add a storage tower. She explained the secret of a secret vote. Sometimes the most public gift you can give is the right to a private decision. She showed how to mark and how to count and how to post the result where auditors, neighbors with chalk could verify. Where we come from, she said, ballots are ways for the mighty to ask permission politely. Muttering swelled, then steadied into a strange quiet that sounded like attention. The vote went to red, split, and store. Diego grinned. He loved redundancy like some men love opera. Good, he said to the assembly. Pipes break. Tanks give you a night and a day to fix the break without rationing grief. They moved fast because thirst is not patient. Axiom engineers, curious despite themselves, joined Diego's crews. When he showed them how to cut and sleeve a pipe with a simple jig rather than swapping an entire section, someone hissed through their teeth at the heresy of repair over replacement. Replacement is tidy, Diego said. Tidy is for museums. Districts need mess that works. And established a testing station under a torn shade sail. She trained teens as water chemists, their hands steadying as they watched colors bloom in tubes. She taught them what microbes do to bellies and brains. She taught them the ritual of washing taps with a song timed to a verse. She paid the best compliment a scientist can pay. She put the future in their grip and stepped back. Quinn stood with the bucket brigade and told stories shaped like instructions. He described urban fire codes by telling about the night a block would have burned if not for a kid with a wrench. He lifted heavy things and then insisted someone else lift them too. He corrected stance, not pride. He swore tithes to the goddess of hydration and handed out salt tablets with a priest's gravity. Hask tried to keep his ledger hands on the spigot. He redirected a truck. Naomi found the redirection in the posted flows and followed it like a thread through a maze. She didn't confront Hask in public. She asked him to walk. On the road between the depot and the first tower, among rolling coils of pipe and children playing games with colored caps, she told him about a city where water had become a weapon and peace had not returned until water became boring again. Your job could be boring, she said. Boring is a promotion. He laughed, brittle. And my power? Find a new kind, she said. Be the one people thank because the tap still turned on after the windstorm. The first spigot opened at dusk. The district held its breath as if it expected the pipe to cough dust. It coughed because pipes are honest, and then it ran. The sound of water is basically a choir. People didn't cheer. They lined up with a discipline born of 1,000 dry days and filled their vessels in a silence full of tears. Valrath stood beside Meyer at the edge of the square. You did not lecture, the strategos said. You installed quiet. We installed stewardship, Maya said. People care for what they build. Unless it is taken, Valrath said, reflex. It wasn't a threat, it was a history. Then we make taken harder, Maya replied. With posted numbers, with neighbors who own the map, with surprise audits, with valves that require 2 hands. Valrath considered the valves, and perhaps also a future that made them necessary. Strategos, Archivist Severance murmured. The cameras show decreased queue length, increased clinic compliance, and a 31% reduction in altercations near the depot. We will need more cameras, Valrath said, but it did not sound like the old kind of surveillance. It sounded like a desire for better spreadsheets. That night, on a rooftop under a sky used to watching thirst, the Water Council met for the first time. A baker, a midwife, a retired pipefitter, a queue keeper, 2 teenagers who had out-tested and by coin toss, overseer Hask. Maya gave them a single charge. I don't want thanks, she said. I want you to be so effective that you make us irrelevant. Quinn passed cups. Diego fell asleep on his back with a wrench on his chest. Naomi collected idioms like seashells and stared up and whispered to the stars as if they were colleagues. We're trying the after of all. Please advise. The stars said what stars always say, nothing. The towers whispered instead, and it sounded like an answer. The second week taught what the first promised. Water is a civics class in disguise. The loop held. The tanks took the heat's insult and did not answer with failure. The queues shortened. The fights at dawn evaporated like dew. With fewer hours spent walking, children appeared in places they hadn't. At the testing station, under the shade sail, around a chalkboard Naomi had coaxed out of a supply depot and declared a public notice wall. She wrote in the Axiom trade tongue and in the locals' script. Then she added pictures with a patient hand, so no one needed someone else's literacy to access law. The board sparkled with the banal glories of self-government. Repair schedules, chlorination logs, boil notices for the old well that fed only the East Quarter, a cartoon of a frowning valve labeled Do Not Touch Solo. Quinn taught a bucket brigade rhythm to a stick drum band. Now when a line needed clearing or a valve needed the dignity of 2 hands, a song rose, and work arrived singing. Hask tested his new job, quietly at first, then with a tentative pride that embarrassed him. He oversaw audits, not queues. When the West Tower's float began to stick, he walked the line himself in the dark with a lantern, muttering, as careful as a man stepping around sleeping lions. He put a check mark next to reported in person on the ledger and was startled by the way his hand shook. It was too smooth to last. Change creates losers, and losers get inventive. 3 days after the board went up, the water trucks returned from the capital with fewer crates and more men. The head of security for the depot concession, a man named Rel with eyes like empty shelves, strolled into the square with an air of bored danger. He had made his living on scarcity. Scarcity had been privatized hope. He regarded the spigots the way a moth regards a clean window, with hatred. You are unauthorized, Rel told Maya, which was true in the narrow sense that nobody had ever authorized mercy on his watch. Maya did not posture. She introduced the Water Council by name and pointed to the posted charter. District 17 now authorizes itself, she said, under the observation of the strategos and the prime. Rel laughed, a sound that had made men step back in other towns. Observation doesn't mean protection, he said. 2 of his men put hands on the valves. It happened fast but not hot. The bucket brigade's song started before Quinn had to shout. Naomi raised her camera and said loudly, "Smile for the audit," and walked straight to the men's hands and said calmly, "If you turn that, you will unseat bacteria in the line, and I will personally follow the resulting diarrhea to your boss." The men hesitated. Humor is an underrated non-lethal weapon, so is the specific threat of public shaming via gastrointestinal misery. Quinn stepped between Rel and the valve and raised both palms. "Nobody needs to be a lesson today," he said. "We built this system to be boring. Let it be boring." Rel looked past them at Valrath, who had not intervened, which meant Valrath was intervening in a different register. The strategos stood with arms open in the axiom gesture of invitation to failure. If Rel made a spectacle, he would be the record, not the record keeper. Fine, Rel said at last, a theatrical surrender. Keep your toy, we'll see who drinks when the pipe splits. That's why we built tanks, Diego called helpfully, head still in a hatch. Rel's eyes promised a later that would be ugly. Later arrived at midnight. Someone tried to cut the east line. The knife bit polymer, the polymer fought back. The cut slowed flow, launched alarms. The two-hand valve refused the saboteur's single wrench. The teens on tower watch hit the drum code for line breach, and Quinn and 3 ants sprinted down the alley with clamps and a ratchet. Maya jogged behind with a light and a language only some people speak. The voice that turns panic into roles with verbs. They fixed it. It took 20 minutes. When the sun rose, Hask had a list of 4 names given to him not by an informant but by neighbors who were done being thirsty for other men's profit. Hask did not call Valrath. He called the Water Council. They convened under the board and held what Naomi called an accountability circle, and the Axiom officers called, with anthropological interest, non-coercive compliance ritual. The 4 saboteurs stood before their neighbors. Fear makes people lie, so does pride. But now the valve was a witness and the drum a timestamp. One confessed, then all. Rel had paid in ration bonuses. Hask asked the circle what justice looked like. Not exile, said the midwife. I'm tired of losing sons to other people's decisions. Not jail, said the baker. We need hands, not walls. Work, said one of the teens, chin up. They made a cut, make them fix cuts. So the 4 joined the maintenance crews for a season. Their ration bonuses were replaced by the boring honor of being greeted without flinching. Rel left the district with a sneer and a scar on his ledger. Valrath said nothing, but the angle of the Strategos' arms shifted, a 30-degree concession that Maya saw and stored. Later that afternoon, Arthais opened a channel. The Prime watched the footage of the circle with a stillness that had once been used to frighten ambassadors. You prefer circles to cages, Arthais said. We prefer outcomes, Maya said. Cages don't fix pipes. Arthais considered the board over Maya's shoulder. Our projections indicate a reduction in unrest by 62%. Your projections have good taste, Naomi said primly. And your ballot, Arthais added, tasting the ritual again. It selected a storage tower over a straight line. It introduced delay in pursuit of resilience. That is a sentence I want on a flag, Diego muttered. Arthais' facets caught the sun. Strategos, the Prime said, observe their boring. There was respect in it. The Directorate had many arts. Perhaps it was time to add one more, the art of keeping taps on. Fear could not teach that. Awe did not know the recipe. That night the district celebrated like grown-ups. They cleaned tools, they posted tomorrow's schedule, they drank more and twirled less. In the square, a new notice appeared. Election, 2 open seats on Water Council. The rules were simple, the terms short, the pay a stipend, and the promise that people would knock on your door when their basin clogged. Naomi printed ballots with pictures and words. The elders brought stools. The teens who had confessed to sabotage volunteered as ushers. At the edge of the light, Valrath stood beside archivist Severance. Awe keeps people still, the Strategos murmured. This keeps them standing. Standing is a different stillness, the archivist said. Useful for long work. Valrath did not answer. The drum kept easy time. The valves whispered. The district, which had been a lesson in obedience, became, in the way evenings do when no one orders them to, homework for citizenship. A system is only as good as its ugliest day. Corinth 3 obliged with a sermon. A heat burst from a high-altitude inversion slammed into a dust front and shoved it like a bully. The sky turned the color of old bruises. Wind came as a wall. The first tank groaned. The second sang a metal throat warning. The east line jumped on its brackets, and the third bracket snapped like a cheap promise, and felt the pressure wobble before the drum spoke. We're dropping head, she said, already running for the board. Naomi snatched the megaphone. Quinn hit the code for line break, then added 3 sharp strikes, the code they had agreed would mean not a drill. What followed was a kind of choreography only communities learn. The bucket brigades flowed to the weak blocks, tins on shoulders like a river of shoulders. The council split without debate into clamp and comfort. The clinic posted a sign that said dehydration first, then sent a runner to the elders. Diego swore a devout prayer to the god of gaskets and dived into a hatch before it could shut on him. Hask ran the board with a composure that surprised exactly one person, himself. The break was at the elbow south of the market, where Rel's men had nicked the polymer weeks before and the scar had become a prophecy. Wind made tools clumsy. Dust made eyes sting. Quinn dropped to his belly and shoved his shoulder under the pipe to take its insult so Diego could work. Two teenagers, one of them a former saboteur, slammed clamps in place with a rhythm so clean it could have been a song. "Bleed it there," Diego shouted, voice rough. "Ease the head, don't starve the clinic." And then Naomi did something that seemed like magic and was actually public health. They turned rumor into a utility. Naomi set 3 runners like relays, west, market, clinic, with the only 2 pieces of information that mattered, where and when. Where the water is in the next hour, when the line comes back to you, do not promise more than that. And commandeered the notice board and began posting times in chalk, then annotated them with a string and pins so anyone could see the logic. Maya walked the route she knew would burn her lungs and stopped at every door where the old had stopped walking years ago. "We come to you," she said, and the phrase fed more than the body. The tanks held. They had been over-designed, which is to say designed with respect for entropy. The clamps took, the elbow stopped spitting, the line settled back on new brackets and swore eternal hatred for weather. Diego lay on his back and laughed like a man who has wrestled a small god and not lost. Quinn hauled him up with hands that had hauled 100 men up and set him down gentle as prayer. In the clinic and found what she'd been afraid of. Bad water had already found a mouth. A child shook with the thin, furious rhythm of a body deciding whether to forgive the world. "Oral rehydration," she said, and the words were simply a longer way of saying life. The midwife was already mixing salts and sugars. Naomi sat on the floor and translated fear into steps a grandmother could follow. The council's new ushers formed a line that wasn't for water this time, but for patience. The storm moved on the way sermons do, leaving some converts, some skeptics, and a lot of tired people. By dusk, the spigots hissed a steady yes again. The board showed a tangle of chalk lines and times like a war plan written by a kind person. The councils posted a simple report, service interruption, 4 hours, 12 minutes. Priorities met, clinic Elder Row West Block. Loss, 1 elbow, 3 brackets, 2 ratchets, 0 lives. Valrath arrived without escorts. It was, Maya realized, not to inspect but to bear witness. "Your doctrine," the strategos said, voice low, "works when things break." "Our doctrine is things break," Maya said. "The rest is choreography." Arthais called in, voice rough as if the prime had run somewhere for the first time in a long time. "We watched," Arthais said. "We saw failure as a rehearsal, not a verdict." "Also," Naomi said tartly, "we saw your depot trucks circling like vultures. Tell Rel we have photos of his men stepping across elders to get good angles. We have already told Rel that scarcity is no longer a line item," Arthais said, surprising them all. "He is reassigned to a position where his contempt will harm fewer throats." Quinn walked Valrath to the repaired elbow and told the story of the clamps like a myth. He pointed to the teenagers' names scrawled in chalk under the pipe. "We sign our work," he said, "so the next person knows who to ask for help or who to blame politely." Valrath traced one name with a gloved finger. "He was a saboteur." "He is a plumber," Quinn corrected. The strategos turned to Maya. "When we teach war," Valrath said, "we speak of decisive battles. This," a gesture took in the tanks, the board, the dust still settling like an argument that had tired itself out. "This is not decisive." "No," Maya said, "it's persuasive." Arthais broke the silence that followed with a sentence that landed like rain on roofs designed to listen. "Corridors will widen," the prime said. "We will open 3 routes and 2 embassies now. The Scientific Council convenes in one cycle. District 17 is classified as a pilot in post-Star administration. Archivist Severance made a small sound that librarians make when a new section is born. Your report, Captain, Arthais added, tone almost wry. Make it accurate and unbearable. Maya smiled. I excel at both. That evening the district did not hold a parade, they held a potluck. Boring food tasted like survival. The teens played the drum, but softly, like a promise to be louder only for fires. Hask poured water for the elders and did not count sips, and the elders decided to die another day, a long time from now, with teeth and humor. Maya sat with her crew on the tank tower steps. Diego's hands were raw and perfect, and's voice had dropped to a ragged whisper from answering questions. Naomi's hair was full of chalk dust and pride. Quinn hummed low, a hymn that somehow knew the tune of emergency sirens and made them sound like church. System check, Meyer asked. People and croaked are online. Pipes, Diego said, are petty and will need to be wooed daily. Good. Rumor control, Naomi said, is the true high art and I require a stipend. Bucket brigades, Quinn said, will invent their own songs. That's healthy. Maya looked toward the stars, which had again nothing to add. She didn't mind. The tanks had spoken on their behalf. The Prime called the ceremony a protocol activation. District 17 called it a party with paperwork. The Directorate and the Terran Research Service signed a charter that would have sounded like treason a month prior and like common sense a year from now. Reciprocal passage, joint labs, and ombuds network staffed by people whose power came from being tiresome in the right way. There were stamps. There were cookies, which is one definition of civilization. The embassies opened modestly. A room on the station where people could argue about standards for pipe threads, and a room on Artemis where an Axiom engineer named Pell studied a toolbox like a religious text, and hung a printout over the lab door, iteration welcome here. Naomi taped a list of new words to the wall, ballot, audit, potluck, ombuds, and added respectful heckling with a footnote explaining that it is different from sabotage. Valrith toured Artemis and paused at the galley table where the crew posted their own notice board, repairs, rosters, recipes. You live in councils, the strategos observed. We live in errands, Maya said. Councils are how we coordinate errands without assigning a king to the broom. Arthais convened the first scientific council by standing in a room without a throne and asking for work plans. It was almost rude in its efficiency. Projects were proposed, grants assigned. A committee formed not to choose winners but to ask every team, what would breaking look like? Build backward from that. Archivist Severance delivered the Directorate's report to the Prime, a document that would ripple outward through departments and dinner tables both. The archivist did not spare anyone's pride. The language was crisp. High initial yield, high maintenance costs, low resilience. Consent, slow initial yield, low maintenance costs, high resilience. Recommendation, pilot expansion. At the end, they appended an annex called Boring Heroics, which contained case studies from Corinth 3 written in the style of field manuals and bedtime stories. Rel vanished into an office where budgets go to be punished. Hask, uncomfortably famous, returned to being a man who knew where spare gaskets lived. The Water Council ran its second election. A grandmother lost by 2 votes and shrugged, then taught the winner the trick of listening with your face. The teens who had clamped the elbow refused a medal. They accepted with visible delight. A bin of better clamps. Maya drafted the promised report. She wrote it like she was talking to a cousin who might not read past page 2. She did not romanticize. She listed every failure, near miss, and small miracle with the same font. Lessons do not centralize what breaks locally. Post numbers like liturgy. Design valves to require 2 hands and 2 names. Pay ushers. Pay midwives more. Do not let the man who profits from the queue control the chalk. She added a line Diego insisted on. Sanitation saves more lives than swords. Arthais underlined it in their copy. Valrith circled it and wrote, In a different hand than Maya had ever seen from the Strategos, yes. On the day Artemis undocked, the bay's atmosphere smelled less like ozone and more like anticipation. Pell brought a gift, a gravitic lens component redesigned with Diego's taper. Diego whooped, then wrote their names first on the joint paper describing it, and traded a chlorination protocol for a bacterial assay the Directorate had built and never used on civilians. Naomi hugged archivist Severance, surprising them into a stiff little laugh that might one day evolve into a hug back. Quinn taught 3 champions how to set splints for bones that don't exactly work like human bones but protest in the same register. Valrath walked with Maya to the airlock. "I am not yet an evangelist," the Strategos said, "but I have ceased being a priest of awe." "That's a demotion I respect," Maya said. "Fear is a budget," Valrath said almost to themselves. "We will spend less. Spend it on pipes," Maya said, "and auditors and cookies." Valrath made the small gesture across their chest, the one it had learned meant both battle and birth. "You will return," the Strategos said. It was not a question. "We will bring kids," Maya said. "They ask better questions." Arthize's voice came over channel, not booming and not small. "Captain Rios, your species has given us a problem we cannot shoot. Thank you." "You're welcome," Maya said. "Problems that can't be shot last longer." The Artemis slipped free, a leaf off a pond that had decided to be a river. The stars arranged themselves into the old wrongness that now felt like a map trying to catch up. Naomi set a course that included detours for friendship, and cataloged samples and wrote to the teens about filters and futures. Diego slept on the deck with a wrench as a pillow, as if the ship were a stubborn animal that liked to be near him. Quinn made soup and labeled it with a joke that would savor properly when warmed. Maya finished the report and added a line her father would have approved, brought a wrench, left a cookbook. Situation ongoing, they jumped. Behind them, a district kept time by valves and drums and ballots. Ahead, corridors widened where hammers had once been stored. In the middle, where humans like to live, 1,000 errands waited. The work was not glorious. It would not adorn a throne. It would make dinners possible. It would let children invent slang for audit and ombuds, and quit cutting that line, Gerald, my grandma sees you. HFY is not a hymn to might. It is a stubborn recipe. Disasters plus duties plus jokes simmered until edible. It is the after of awe. It is a species who, when asked whether they are conquerors or conquered, shrugs, passes the ladle and says, "We're the ones who show up with tools."